Chapter 1. A Bride's Mysterious Disappearance. The autumn of 1887 proved to be particularly dreary in London, with a persistent fog that clung to the city like a mourner's veil. I had been sharing quarters with Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street for several years by then, and had grown accustomed to the peculiar rhythms of our shared existence. That October morning, I found my friend in one of his dark moods, having gone 3 weeks without a case worthy of his considerable talents. "I fear for my mind, Watson," he said without turning from the window. "It is like a precision instrument. Without use, it begins to dull." I had just opened my mouth to respond when Mrs. Hudson's distinctive knock interrupted. Holmes straightened immediately, a predator catching a scent. "A client, Watson. Female, upper middle class, and in considerable distress if the urgency of her knock is any indication." Before I could express amazement at his deductions, Mrs. Hudson confirmed his assessment. "A Lady Hargrove to see you, Mr. Holmes. She's in quite a state." Holmes' eyes lit with that peculiar fire I had come to recognize as the awakening of his formidable intellect. "Show her in at once." The woman who entered our sitting room was indeed in her early 30s, with the refined manner of good breeding evident despite her obvious distress. Her mourning clothes were of the finest quality, and the dark veil she pushed back revealed striking features marred by recent tears and sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice quavering, "I am at my wit's end. The police have been worse than useless, and you are my last hope." Holmes gestured to the chair opposite him. "Pray be seated, Lady Hargrove. I perceive you have recently lost your husband. My condolences, but that is not the matter which brings you here today." Her eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" A ghost of a smile played across Holmes's thin lips. "Your mourning. Attire is approximately 6 months worn, yet the wedding band on your finger has been recently polished, an unconscious habit of one who still feels the attachment strongly. The matter that brings you here, however, involves another disappearance. Does it not?" Lady Hargrove sank into the chair. "You are everything they say you are, Mr. Holmes. Yes, my husband passed in April. A riding accident. But it is my stepdaughter who concerns me now." "Do tell us the details," I encouraged, taking out my notebook. "My stepdaughter Eliza was to be married yesterday to Lord Reginald Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood estate in Sussex. The ceremony was set for noon. By 11, Eliza was dressed in her wedding gown, seemingly ready. I left her alone for no more than 15 minutes. When I returned, she was gone." Holmes leaned forward. "Gone without trace?" "Not entirely," Lady Hargrove replied. "Her veil remained on her dressing-table chair, and there was this." She extracted a small envelope which Holmes accepted eagerly. "It was found on her pillow after we had been searching for over an hour." Holmes opened the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper. As he read, his eyebrows rose marginally, the only indication of his interest. He passed the note to me, without comment. The message was brief, written in a feminine hand that trembled noticeably. "I cannot go through with it. Those hollow eyes haunt my dreams." "Forgive me. Hollow eyes?" I questioned, looking up from the note. Lady Hargrove shook her head. "I have no idea what she meant. Eliza had been somewhat nervous, but she and Lord Blackwood have been engaged for nearly a year. There seemed no reason for such a dramatic flight." Holmes studied our visitor intently. "Was there any indication of Lord Blackwood's character that might have given your stepdaughter cause for concern?" A flash of hesitation crossed her features. "Reginald Blackwood is considered an excellent match, wealthy, titled, and not unattractive. He is perhaps somewhat austere in his manner, but Eliza never expressed any serious reservations. And yet, she fled," Holmes mused. "Was anything else disturbed in her room? Any indication of how she departed?" Her traveling cloak was missing, and a small valise. Most curious of all, she left her jewelry behind, even her mother's pearl necklace, which she treasured above all possessions. "And Mr. Holmes?" She hesitated. The constable found something outside her window. Holmes' eyes gleamed. What was discovered? Men's footprints in the soft earth below her balcony, and what appeared to be a partial handprint on the balustrade, as though someone had climbed up. I felt a chill at this revelation. You believe she was abducted? Lady Hargrove wrung her hands. I don't know what to believe. The note suggests she left willingly, yet those footprints— Inspector Lestrade said it was most likely that Eliza had a secret lover who helped her escape an unwanted marriage. But I cannot believe she would cause such scandal willingly. And those words about hollow eyes, they haunt me. Holmes had risen and begun to pace, his energy suddenly restored. The police theory lacks imagination. I shall need to examine your stepdaughter's room exactly as it was left. Has anything been disturbed? Very little. Lord Blackwood's mother insisted on removing the wedding dress. She was quite hysterical, claiming it was bad luck. But otherwise the room remains as it was. And Lord Blackwood himself? How has he reacted to his bride's disappearance? A shadow passed over Lady Hargrove's face. With remarkable restraint, Mr. Holmes, almost cold in his composure. He has offered a substantial reward for information leading to Eliza's return. Interesting, Holmes murmured. Watson, it seems our fog-bound tedium has been lifted. He turned back to Lady Hargrove. We shall call upon you this afternoon. In the meantime, I would ask for a detailed account of Eliza's movements in the days preceding the wedding, particularly any unusual visitors or correspondence. Relief flooded Lady Hargrove's features. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Shall I send a carriage for you at 2 o'clock? That would be most convenient, Holmes agreed. As our visitor rose to leave, he added, One final question. This reference to hollow eyes, has Eliza ever mentioned such a thing before? Lady Hargrove paused. Not that I recall, although, about a month ago, I did find her in the library, absorbed in some old family papers. When I inquired, she quickly put them away, saying something about wanting to know more about the Blackwood family history. She seemed troubled, but insisted it was merely wedding nerves. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that familiar light that indicated the hunt was on. Family papers? Most illuminating. Until this afternoon, then. After our visitor had departed, Holmes sprang into action, pulling on his coat with uncharacteristic haste. Come, Watson. We must make inquiries about the Blackwood family before we meet Lady Hargrove. This case promises layers of complexity that those plodding policemen will never uncover. A reluctant bride, mysterious footprints, family papers, and those peculiar words, hollow eyes. The game is most definitely afoot. I hurried to match his stride, feeling that familiar mix of exhilaration and trepidation. As we stepped into the swirling London fog, I could not shake the impression that this particular mystery would lead us down darker paths than either of us anticipated. Chapter 2. The Blackwood legacy, Holmes' mood had transformed entirely as we made our way through London's fog-shrouded streets. Where earlier he had been languid with ennui, now he virtually vibrated with purpose, his keen mind already dissecting the peculiar circumstances of Eliza Hargrove's disappearance. Tell me, Watson, he said as our hansom cab rattled along, what struck you as most significant about Lady Hargrove's account? I considered the question carefully. The note, certainly. Those words about hollow eyes seemed deliberately cryptic. Indeed. And what of Lord Blackwood's reaction? Did that not strike you as curious? His composure in the face of his bride's disappearance does seem unnatural, I admitted. Although shock affects people differently, Holmes nodded, a faint smile playing at his lips. You improve, Watson. Our first stop must be the British Library. I wish to examine certain records before we encounter the Blackwood family directly. The next hour passed in a flurry of research, with Holmes poring over old newspapers and county histories. I caught glimpses of headlines about the Blackwood estate and family obituaries, but Holmes shared nothing of his findings until we were again in a cab bound for Lady Hargrove's Belgravia residence. "The Blackwoods have a rather fascinating history," he remarked, staring thoughtfully into the swirling fog outside our window. "3 generations of distinguished service to the Crown, considerable wealth from colonial ventures in India, and a curious pattern of tragedy among their brides." My interest was immediately piqued. "Tragedy? What sort?" "Lord Blackwood's grandfather, the first Baron, lost his wife under mysterious circumstances. Supposedly she fell from a balcony at their country estate. His son, our current Lord Blackwood's father, was widowed twice. His first wife died of a wasting illness within a year of marriage. The second, Reginald's mother, survived to raise her son, but reportedly suffered from nervous disorders that kept her largely confined." "Good heavens, Holmes! You suggest this pattern might relate to Eliza's disappearance?" Holmes tapped his fingers against his knee. "I suggest nothing yet, merely compile facts. But it is worth noting that the current Lord Blackwood stands to lose a considerable portion of his inheritance if he does not marry before his 30th birthday. A stipulation in his grandfather's will, designed to ensure the family line. That birthday, I discovered, falls next month." Before I could respond, our cab arrived at the Hargrove residence, an elegant townhouse with black crepe still adorning the door-knocker in remembrance of the late Lord Hargrove. Lady Hargrove herself greeted us, leading us promptly to her stepdaughter's chambers on the 2nd floor. Eliza's room reflected refined feminine taste, delicate furnishings, watercolor landscapes on the walls, and a writing desk positioned near large windows overlooking a small garden. The wedding veil lay exactly as described, draped across the dressing table chair, its pearls and lace an incongruous reminder of celebration amid distress. Holmes moved methodically through the space, examining everything with his pocket magnifying glass: the carpet near the balcony doors, the discarded veil, the writing desk, and finally the bed where the note had been found. "Lady Hargrove," he said suddenly, "you mentioned family papers that Eliza was examining. Would these have been Hargrove documents or Blackwood?" "Blackwood, I believe. Lord Reginald sent over several boxes of family memorabilia approximately 6 weeks ago. He said he wished Eliza to become familiar with their family traditions before the wedding." Holmes exchanged a significant glance with me. "And where might these papers be now?" "In the library downstairs. Eliza had sorted through most of them, but some remained in their original boxes. I shall need to examine them, but first—" Holmes moved to the balcony doors and stepped outside. I followed, finding him crouched near the balustrade, studying the now faded footprints below. "Curious," he murmured. "The police report suggests a lover's assistance, but these prints tell a different tale. Look here, Watson." He pointed to a distinctive mark in the soft earth. "These are not the prints of a young gallant coming to spirit away his love. Note the unusual tread, heavy measured steps of a man of considerable size, wearing boots of expensive quality but unusual design. Not English-made, I'd wager." Back inside, Holmes spent several minutes examining the writing desk, where he found several crumpled drafts of letters in Eliza's hand. "Correspondence to friends, nothing of apparent significance," he noted, though I observed him pocket one particular sheet. Lady Hargrove led us to the library, where Holmes immediately set upon the Blackwood family papers with remarkable intensity. For nearly half an hour, he sifted silently through yellowed documents, pausing occasionally to make notes. "Most illuminating," he said finally, holding up a faded daguerreotype. "Watson, Lady Hargrove, observe this family portrait of the first Baron Blackwood and his wife, taken shortly before her tragic accident. The image showed a stern-faced gentleman and a pale, beautiful woman with a peculiarly vacant expression. Even through the photographic process of the period, there was something distinctly unsettling about her eyes. Deep-set, shadowed, and somehow empty. The first Baroness Blackwood, Holmes said softly, was known for her beauty, but also for her increasingly erratic behavior before her death. The family physician diagnosed melancholia, but local rumors suggested something far more sinister. "What precisely?" Lady Hargrove asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Holmes replaced the photograph carefully. "That, madam, is precisely what I believe your stepdaughter discovered, a family secret worth fleeing from, or perhaps worth being silenced for." Chapter 3. An audience with Lord Blackwood. Lady Hargrove's complexion paled at Holmes's insinuation. "Mr. Holmes, you cannot possibly suggest that Lord Blackwood's family—" "I suggest nothing yet, Lady Hargrove," Holmes interjected smoothly. "I merely follow where the evidence leads, and at present it leads directly to the Blackwood residence. Is Lord Reginald currently in London?" "Yes, at the family's townhouse in Mayfair. He postponed his return to Sussex after Eliza's disappearance." Holmes rose decisively. "Then we shall call upon him immediately. Watson, bring your revolver." "You anticipate danger?" I asked, startled by this suggestion. His eyes held that peculiar glint that always signaled his deepest interest. "I anticipate the unexpected, which amounts to much the same thing." Lord Blackwood's London residence proved to be an imposing edifice of darkened stone, its windows like narrowed eyes regarding the street with suspicion. We were admitted by a butler whose funereal demeanor suited the somber atmosphere perfectly. The man who awaited us in the study stood with his back to a crackling fire, his tall figure casting an elongated shadow across the Persian carpet. Lord Reginald Blackwood was younger than I had expected, perhaps 30 years of age, with aristocratic features and the cold, appraising eyes of a man accustomed to power. His mourning clothes were impeccably tailored, yet he wore them with an almost theatrical gravity. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he acknowledged with the barest inclination of his head. "Lady Hargrove informed me of your involvement. I trust you bring news of my wayward bride?" Holmes studied him with that penetrating gaze I knew so well. "Not as yet, Lord Blackwood. I am still assembling the facts of the case. Perhaps you might assist by sharing your perspective on Miss Hargrove's disappearance?" A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, or impatience, crossed Blackwood's features before his mask of composure returned. "There is little to tell beyond what you already know. Eliza vanished on our wedding day, leaving a nonsensical note. I have offered a substantial reward for information leading to her recovery." "You speak of her as one might a lost possession," Holmes observed mildly. Blackwood's jaw tightened. "I speak of her as a man concerned for his fiancée's welfare, Mr. Holmes. Eliza has always been of a nervous disposition, sensitive to influences beyond those that trouble more practical minds. I fear she may have succumbed to a temporary madness." "Curious choice of words," Holmes remarked. "This madness, would it have anything to do with certain Blackwood family papers she had been examining?" The effect of this question was immediate and revealing. Lord Blackwood's composure fractured momentarily, his hand tightening on the mantelpiece before he recovered himself with visible effort. "I fail to see how family histories could provoke such a reaction," he replied, his voice carefully modulated. "Old documents, ancestral portraits, hardly the stuff to drive a woman to abandon her wedding, unless perhaps she discovered something disturbing within those histories." Holmes paced slowly around the room, examining the portraits that lined the walls. "Something concerning the fates of previous Blackwood brides, perhaps?" Blackwood's laugh was brittle. "You've been listening to local superstitions, Mr. Holmes. The Blackwood name has been subject to rural gossip for generations, the inevitable result of wealth and prominence in an isolated community. My mother could tell you how tiresome such rumors become." "Indeed. I should very much like to speak with your mother, Lord Blackwood." "Impossible, I'm afraid. The Lady Blackwood is indisposed. The disappointment of the cancelled wedding has affected her nerves severely. Her physician has prescribed complete rest and isolation from disturbing influences. Holmes nodded as though this confirmed some private theory. One final question, if I may. The note Miss Hargrove left mentioned hollow eyes that haunted her dreams. Does this phrase hold any significance for you? I observed Blackwood carefully as Holmes posed this question, and was rewarded with a momentary widening of his eyes, a fleeting but unmistakable reaction of recognition quickly suppressed. None whatsoever, he replied smoothly. As I said, Eliza had become increasingly fanciful in recent weeks. Now, gentlemen, I have business matters requiring my attention. My staff remains at your disposal should you uncover any information regarding my fiancée's whereabouts. Outside, Holmes was uncharacteristically silent as we walked several blocks before hailing a cab. Well, I prompted finally, what did you make of Lord Blackwood? A study in contradictions, Watson. A man playing the role of bereaved fiancé rather than experiencing the emotion genuinely. Did you notice how he referred to Eliza in the present tense initially, then shifted to past tense during our conversation? Most revealing. You believe he knows where she is? Holmes's expression was grave. I believe he knows far more than he admits about Eliza, about those hollow eyes, and about the fate that befell previous Blackwood brides. But knowledge is not the same as culpability. What now then? Now, Watson, we must speak with someone who can illuminate the Blackwood family history without reservation, someone who stands outside their sphere of influence, yet close enough to know their secrets. A rare smile touched his lips. Fortunately, I know exactly where to find such a person. The cab deposited us at a modest bookshop in a quieter part of London. The proprietor, a stooped man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, greeted Holmes with evident surprise and pleasure. Mr. Holmes, it has been some years since you last darkened my door. Still seeking obscure volumes on criminal methodology? Not today, Hawkins. Today I seek information about the Blackwood family of Sussex. Specifically the circumstances surrounding the deaths of the previous Lord Blackwood's 2 wives. The bookseller's expression sobered immediately. The Blackwoods? A dark business. That. Come to the back room. This is not a conversation for open shop floors. As he led us through stacks of leather-bound volumes, I wondered what new darkness we would uncover, and how it connected to the mysterious hollow eyes that had driven a frightened bride to flee on her wedding day. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The back room of Hawkins' bookshop was a scholar's sanctuary. Walls lined with rare volumes, a single desk buried beneath manuscripts, and the comforting scent of aged paper and leather bindings. The bookseller lit an oil lamp against the gathering dusk before retrieving a leather portfolio from a locked cabinet. I hesitate to share such macabre tales, gentlemen, but if Mr. Holmes deems it necessary— Hawkins adjusted his spectacles nervously. My father was steward to the first Baron Blackwood for 30 years. Upon his death, he left me certain private journals, records he felt should be preserved, though the family would have surely destroyed them. Holmes leaned forward intently. Your father believed there was something unnatural about the Blackwood household? Not merely unnatural, Mr. Holmes. Cursed. Hawkins spread several yellowed pages on the desk. The first Baroness, Lady Cecilia, was by all accounts a vivacious, spirited woman when she married Lord Edmund Blackwood in 1832. Within 6 months, however, her demeanor changed dramatically. She became withdrawn, prone to staring vacantly, for hours. Servants reported hearing her conversations with unseen presences. Madness? I suggested. Hawkins shook his head. My father believed something more sinister was at work. Lady Cecilia began to describe disturbing dreams in which she claimed her husband's ancestors visited her, hollow-eyed specters demanding she fulfill some ancient obligation to the Blackwood line. Holmes and I exchanged glances at this revelation. The same phrase, "Hollow eyes," I murmured. "Indeed, doctor." The pattern repeated with alarming consistency. The current Lord Blackwood's father married twice. His first wife documented similar experiences in letters to her sister. Visions of hollow-eyed apparitions and a growing terror of her husband's family chapel. She died within a year, allegedly of consumption. Holmes studied the documents with his customary intensity. And the second wife, the current Lady Blackwood? She survived, but at considerable cost to her sanity. After the birth of Reginald, she suffered a complete nervous collapse. My father's journals record her hysterical claims that the Blackwoods practiced some form of dark ritual to ensure the continuity of their bloodline, a ritual requiring the spiritual sacrifice of each new bride brought into the family. I scoffed involuntarily. "Surely you don't suggest we give credence to such supernatural nonsense, Holmes?" My friend's expression remained impassive. "I suggest only that we follow the evidence, Watson, wherever it may lead. Behind even the most fantastical claims often lies a kernel of truth, or a very human malevolence disguised as the supernatural." He turned back to Hawkins. "These rituals, was there any physical evidence of their nature?" The bookseller hesitated before extracting a small bound journal from the portfolio. "This belonged to Lady Victoria, the first Lord Blackwood's wife. Her private diary, rescued by my father after her death. The final entries are disturbing." Holmes opened the fragile volume carefully, reading aloud from its final pages. "April 18th, 1835. I have discovered the terrible truth behind the Blackwood legacy. The chapel vault contains their secret, the means by which they perpetuate their cursed bloodline. Edmund insists I must undergo the hollowing after our child is born. I cannot endure it. I would rather die than become like those empty vessels. I have seen in the family portraits their souls extracted to feed the ancient hunger." A chill pervaded the room that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. "3 days after writing this," Hawkins said quietly, "Lady Victoria fell from the West Tower balcony at Blackwood Manor. The official verdict was suicide in a fit of postpartum melancholia." Holmes closed the diary gently. "And where is this chapel vault located?" "At the Blackwood estate in Sussex, a medieval structure predating the manor house itself. Local legend claims it was built upon the remains of a pagan temple." Hawkins lowered his voice. "My father always warned that no Blackwood bride should ever enter that chapel alone. He believed something ancient dwells there, something that requires periodic sacrifice to maintain the family's prosperity." "Folklore and superstition," I declared, though with less conviction than I intended. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose of deep contemplation. Whether supernatural or entirely mundane, something in that chapel terrified Lady Victoria, and I suspect our missing bride discovered the same secret. "Hawkins, I require one more piece of information. Is there a portrait gallery at Blackwood Manor?" "Yes, in the East Wing. A collection spanning generations of Blackwood ancestors and their wives. And would this gallery be accessible to a visitor? Say, a prospective bride being introduced to her future home?" "Certainly. It's a point of family pride, the visual representation of their illustrious lineage." Holmes nodded as though confirming a theory. "One final question. The current Lady Blackwood, where has she resided since her nervous collapse?" "In a private wing of the Sussex estate. She has rarely been seen in public these past 20 years, though she apparently retains significant influence over her son's affairs." Holmes rose abruptly. "Watson, we must proceed to Sussex immediately. The answers we seek lie at Blackwood Manor, and I fear time may be of the essence if we are to locate Miss Hargrove alive." "You believe she's being held at the estate?" I asked as we hastily took our leave of the bewildered bookseller. "I believe she discovered what previous Blackwood brides discovered, a secret worth killing to protect. Whether she fled of her own accord or was abducted after learning too much, All paths lead to that family chapel and its mysterious vault. As our train rattled through the darkening countryside toward Sussex, Holmes maintained an unusual silence, his keen eyes fixed on the passing landscape. Only once did he speak, almost to himself rather than to me. "The hollowing, Watson. What manner of ritual could transform a vibrant woman into the hollow-eyed spectre we saw in that daguerreotype? And more importantly, is it already too late for Eliza Hargrove to escape a similar fate?" I had no answer to give him, and as night descended fully upon the Sussex Downs, I could not shake the sensation that we were racing not merely toward a missing bride, but toward a darkness far older and more malevolent than either of us had initially suspected. Chapter 5. Blackwood Manor. We arrived at the village of Thornfield as a thin, gray light began to filter through the morning mist. Having spent an uncomfortable night at the local inn, Holmes had roused me at first light, his energy seemingly undiminished by our hasty journey from London. "We shall present ourselves as art historians," Holmes explained, as our hired trap carried us along the winding country road toward Blackwood Manor. "With Lord Blackwood still in London, the household staff will be less vigilant. I've sent a wire claiming an appointment to catalogue the family portraits for an upcoming publication on aristocratic lineages." "A rather transparent ruse, Holmes," I remarked doubtfully. A thin smile played across his lips. "The best deceptions, Watson, rely on appealing to vanity. Few aristocratic households can resist the opportunity to have their ancestral portraits featured in a scholarly publication." Blackwood Manor emerged from the morning fog like some ancient leviathan rising from the depths, a sprawling Tudor structure with later Gothic additions that gave it a disconcertingly asymmetrical appearance. Stone gargoyles peered down from rain-blackened eaves, their eroded features lending them an even more sinister aspect. We were admitted by a dour housekeeper who accepted Holmes's credentials without question, though her expression suggested a naturally suspicious nature. "Mrs. Fenton," Holmes addressed her with calculated charm, "we understand the family portraits are particularly fine examples of the period. Might we view the gallery immediately? Our publication deadline is most pressing." "The East Wing," she replied curtly. "I shall show you the way, though I must attend to other duties thereafter. Lord Blackwood keeps a reduced staff when in London." The portrait gallery proved to be a long, wood-paneled corridor, lined with generations of stern-faced Blackwood patriarchs and their wives. Holmes moved through the space with apparent scholarly interest, but I knew his keen eyes were searching for something specific. "Observe the progression, Watson," he murmured when Mrs. Fenton had departed. "The earliest portraits show women of natural vibrancy, their eyes particularly well rendered. But look here." He gestured to a portrait dated 1835. Lady Victoria Blackwood, shortly before her death. Compare her expression to those of subsequent Blackwood wives. I saw immediately what had captured Holmes's attention. Where earlier portraits showed women with lively expressions, the later images displayed an unsettling sameness. Faces beautiful, but mask-like, with eyes that seemed to recede deeply into their sockets, devoid of the artist's usual highlighting to suggest life and intelligence. "The hollow-eyed brides," I whispered, a chill settling over me despite the morning sun now streaming through the gallery windows. "Precisely. And now—" Holmes moved suddenly to a small portrait nearly hidden in a corner. "Ah, the current Lady Blackwood, painted shortly after her son's birth. The same distinctive vacuity of expression, the same hollow eyes, yet she lives still, sequestered in this very house." Holmes spun around, scanning the gallery with new urgency. "We must locate the chapel, Watson. According to Lady Victoria's diary, the answers lie in its vault." Leaving the portrait gallery, we navigated the manor's labyrinthine corridors, Holmes moving with a determined stride that suggested he had already memorized the layout from some architectural reference. The few servants we encountered paid us little heed, assuming us to be authorized visitors. "There," Holmes whispered, indicating a heavy oak door partially concealed behind a tapestry. "The private passage to the family chapel." The door yielded to his touch, revealing a stone staircase that descended into shadow. Holmes extracted a small bullseye lantern from his coat pocket, its beam cutting through the darkness as we made our cautious descent. The chapel below proved to be far older than the manor house above, a Norman structure with Romanesque arches and weathered stone pillars. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and ancient incense, undisturbed by the morning breeze that stirred the world above. "Curious," Holmes remarked, examining the altar at the chapel's eastern end. "These symbols carved into the stone, they predate Christian iconography entirely. Pagan, or perhaps even older." I found myself drawn to the chapel walls, where faded frescoes depicted scenes I could not fully comprehend. Robed figures surrounding a central pit or well, arms raised in supplication to something emerging from the darkness below. "Holmes, these images—" "Indeed, Watson. Not the typical religious imagery one expects in a family chapel." Holmes moved methodically around the space, his fingers tracing worn inscriptions, his lantern illuminating corners long forgotten. "The vault entrance must be here somewhere. Lady Victoria's diary was specific about its location beneath the chapel." A sudden noise from above froze us both in place. The unmistakable sound of the chapel door opening and footsteps on the stone stairs. Holmes extinguished his lantern with a swift movement, pulling me into the shadow of a massive pillar as a figure emerged into the chapel's dim interior. It was a woman, elderly but still possessed of a regal bearing, her silver hair arranged in an old-fashioned style, her black dress sweeping the stone floor as she moved with practiced familiarity through the darkened space. She carried no light, suggesting an intimate knowledge of the chapel's layout, or perhaps, more disturbingly, no need for illumination. "Lady Blackwood," Holmes breathed against my ear, his grip on my arm tightening in warning. The woman proceeded, directly to the altar, her movements displaying none of the frailty one might expect from a supposedly invalid recluse. With practiced motions, she pressed a sequence of carved symbols on the altar's side. A grinding sound emerged from beneath the stone floor, and to my astonishment, a section of flagstone slid silently aside, revealing a staircase descending into utter darkness. Lady Blackwood paused at the threshold of this revealed passage, her head tilting as though listening for some sound beyond human hearing. For a moment her face caught a stray beam of light filtering through the chapel's narrow windows, and I had to stifle a gasp of horror. Her eyes, those eyes that had appeared so unnaturally hollow in her portrait, were indeed hollow in the flesh, the sockets seeming to recede impossibly deep into her skull, as though whatever essence had once animated them had been extracted, leaving only an empty vessel behind. Then she was gone, descending into the darkness below, the stone door, sliding closed behind her with the finality of a tomb being sealed. "Holmes," I whispered when I had recovered my voice, "what in God's name did we just witness?" His face in the gloom was grave but determined. "The entrance to the vault, Watson, and I believe the answer to the mystery of the hollow-eyed brides. Come, we must follow her path before the trail grows cold." Chapter 6. Beneath the chapel, Holmes waited until the sound of Lady Blackwood's footsteps had faded before relighting his lantern. The small flame cast elongated shadows across the ancient chapel, transforming the carved figures on the walls into writhing, dancing specters. "We must act quickly, Watson," he whispered, moving toward the altar. "The mechanism appears to be activated by a specific sequence pressed into these carved symbols." I watched as Holmes examined the altar with meticulous care, his long fingers tracing the worn patterns. "Did you observe the sequence Lady Blackwood employed?" "Partially," he replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. 3 symbols were activated, in sequence, first this spiral, then the inverted tree, and finally. His finger hovered over a symbol resembling an eye within a triangle. This one. As Holmes pressed the final symbol, I instinctively tightened my grip on the revolver in my pocket. A low rumbling emanated from beneath our feet, and once again, the section of stone floor slid aside to reveal the descending staircase. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes murmured, "and keep your weapon ready. Whatever secrets the Blackwoods have preserved in this vault, they have already driven one bride to flee and potentially claimed others. We face no ordinary adversary." The stairs descended, at a steep angle, carved from the living bedrock beneath the manor. Our lantern cast just enough light to prevent a misstep, but the darkness beyond its reach seemed almost tangible, a physical presence pressing against the small sphere of illumination. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended, carrying a peculiar mineral scent that reminded me of the limestone caverns I had explored during my military service in India. Yet beneath this natural odor lay something else, a sweetish, cloying scent I recognized from my medical practice. "Holmes," I whispered, "there's a medicinal smell in the air. Chloroform, perhaps, or some similar compound?" Holmes nodded grimly. "Observed and noted, Watson. This suggests our mystery may have a rational explanation after all, however sinister its manifestation." We reached the bottom of the staircase, emerging into a circular chamber that appeared to have been expanded from a natural cavern. Stone columns supported a domed ceiling, their surfaces carved with the same disturbing symbols we had observed in the chapel above. The lantern's beam revealed several passages branching from the central space. Which way would Lady Blackwood have gone? I wondered aloud. Holmes crouched, examining the floor. "Observe the dust pattern, Watson. Regular traffic has worn a clear path toward this eastern passage. And note," he indicated several small droplets on the stone floor. "Fresh condensation, suggesting someone passed this way very recently, disturbing the air." We proceeded cautiously down the eastern passage, the walls narrowing around us until they opened suddenly into a larger chamber that drew a gasp of shock from my lips. The room before us resembled nothing so much as a medieval alchemist's laboratory, combined with a physician's surgery. Glass vessels connected by copper tubing lined stone shelves, while a large central table bore leather restraints at its corners. Complex apparatus of brass and crystal stood on sturdy workbenches, alongside modern medical instruments that gleamed incongruously in our lantern light. "Good Lord, Holmes," I breathed. "What manner of experimentation occurs in this place?" Holmes was already examining the apparatus with intense focus, his expression grim. "Something that bridges ancient superstition and modern science, Watson. Look here." He indicated a leather-bound volume open upon one of the workbenches. "Notes on the extraction and preservation of what the author terms vital essences, and the handwriting matches that in Lord Edmund Blackwood's journals from the Hargrove collection." Before I could respond, a sound from deeper within the complex drew our attention. A woman's voice, though whether in conversation or lamentation, I could not tell. Holmes extinguished our lantern immediately. "This way," he whispered, guiding me through the darkness toward a faint light emanating from yet another chamber beyond. We positioned ourselves at the threshold of this new space, concealed behind a hanging tapestry that permitted us to observe without being seen. The chamber beyond was dominated by a circular pit cut into the bedrock, surrounded by 7 stone chairs arranged like a tribunal. From the pit emanated a faint, phosphorescent glow that illuminated the scene with ghastly blue-green light. Lady Blackwood stood at the pit's edge, her hollow-eyed face upturned as though in communion with some unseen presence. Beside her, to my shock, stood Lord Reginald Blackwood, whom we had believed to be in London. "The preparations are complete, Mother," Lord Blackwood was saying, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "The bride has undergone the preliminary treatments. She resisted, of course, but they all do." "And her essence?" Lady Blackwood's voice was a dry whisper, like autumn leaves skittering across stone. Is it compatible? The initial tests suggest she is ideal, perhaps the most suitable vessel since Victoria. The hollowing can proceed on the appointed night. Good. Lady Blackwood reached up to touch her son's face with skeletal fingers. The hunger grows, Reginald. The lineage must be preserved, the compact honored. Your ancestor paid a terrible price for our family's prosperity. We cannot allow his sacrifice to be in vain. The bride will be prepared as tradition demands, Lord Blackwood assured her. Already her eyes begin to show the change. By the full moon, she will be ready to receive the gift. My hand tightened involuntarily on my revolver, and Holmes placed a restraining hand on my arm, his eyes warning me to remain silent. Yet I could see in his face the same horror and revulsion that I felt. Lady Blackwood turned suddenly toward the pit, making a complex gesture with her hands. It hungers, she intoned. We must provide sustenance until the ceremony. From the shadows stepped a man I had not previously observed, a hulking figure with an impassive face and cold professional demeanor. In his arms he carried a bundle that writhed weakly against its restraints. With methodical detachment he approached the pit's edge. No! The cry escaped my lips before Holmes could stop me. In an instant 3 pairs of eyes turned toward our hiding place, 2 filled with human fury, and 1 pair showing only empty sockets where eyes should have been. Intruders! Lord Blackwood snarled. Seize them, Gideon! The hulking servant dropped his burden and lunged toward our position with surprising speed. Holmes shoved me roughly aside as the man burst through the tapestry, his massive hands grasping at empty air where we had stood a moment before. Run, Watson! Holmes commanded, overturning a workbench to block our pursuer's path. We cannot help Eliza if we are captured ourselves. As we fled back through the laboratory chamber, I caught a glimpse of the bundle the servant had been carrying, and saw a woman's pale face, her eyes sunken and beginning to hollow, her expression locked in silent terror. Eliza Hargrove had been found at last, but whether we could save her from the fate that had claimed generations of Blackwood brides remained to be seen. Chapter 7. Flight and Strategy, or Flight Through the Underground Chambers, was a desperate affair. The hulking servant, Gideon, pursued us with single-minded determination, his heavy footfalls echoing through the passages like the heartbeat of some vast subterranean creature. Holmes navigated the darkness with uncanny precision, pulling me around corners and through narrow apertures that momentarily slowed our pursuer. "The stairs, Watson!" Holmes hissed, yanking me toward the ascending passage we had used earlier. As we scrambled upward, the sound of other voices joined the pursuit. Lord Blackwood issuing sharp commands to what must have been additional household staff. We emerged into the chapel just as the first of our pursuers reached the bottom of the stairs. Holmes slammed his shoulder against a lever beside the altar, and the stone door slid closed with a grinding finality, trapping our pursuers below, at least temporarily. "That will not hold them long," Holmes observed, already striding toward the chapel exit. "They will know alternative routes to the surface. We must be well away before they emerge." The manor house beyond seemed eerily deserted, the few servants we had encountered earlier now conspicuously absent. We made our way through the labyrinthine corridors, Holmes leading with unwavering confidence despite having traversed them only once before. "The side entrance, Watson," he murmured, less visible from the main drive. We emerged into the crisp autumn air, the sun now high above, casting the manor's Gothic facade in harsh relief. Without pausing, Holmes led us not toward the main gates, but across a kitchen garden and into a dense copse of trees that skirted the estate's eastern boundary. Only when we had put a considerable distance between ourselves and Blackwood Manor did Holmes finally slow his pace, allowing me to catch my breath. We stood in a small clearing, the manor now visible only as a dark silhouette through the trees. "My God, Holmes!" I gasped when I could finally speak. "What manner of horror have we uncovered? Those hollowed eyes of Lady Blackwood, and that pit. Indeed, Watson, we face a conspiracy more monstrous than I initially conceived. Holmes's expression was grave, his normally detached demeanor replaced by genuine concern. The Blackwoods have been conducting some form of systematic extraction, whether of some vital fluid or, if one were to entertain more esoteric possibilities, something less tangible. You cannot seriously suggest they are extracting souls, Holmes. I suggest nothing of the sort. I merely observe that generations of Blackwood brides have been subjected to a procedure that leaves them hollow-eyed and vacant, a condition Lady Blackwood exhibits in its most advanced state. Whether the explanation is supernatural or, as I suspect, pseudo-scientific charlatanism cloaked in occult trappings, the outcome for Miss Hargrove will be equally dire if we do not intervene. I paced the small clearing, trying to organize my thoughts. We must alert the authorities immediately. Holmes shook his head. Consider our position, Watson. We illegally trespassed into a nobleman's private chapel and family vault. We have no proof beyond our word of what we witnessed. Lord Blackwood is a respected peer with considerable influence in the county. Against his denials, we would appear as delusional intruders. Then what do you propose? We cannot leave Miss Hargrove to suffer the fate of previous Blackwood brides. Certainly not. Holmes extracted his pipe from his pocket, lighting it with methodical precision that belied the urgency of our situation. We require evidence that will compel official action, and we need to understand precisely what the hollowing entails if we are to prevent its completion. He began to pace, pipe smoke trailing behind him like a banner. Lady Blackwood mentioned a compact and an appointed night, the full moon. According to my astronomical calculations, that gives us 3 days before the final ceremony. 3 days. Eliza Hargrove could be beyond saving by then. Not if my theory is correct. Holmes stopped pacing, his eyes suddenly alight with realization. The process appears to be gradual. Lady Blackwood referred to preliminary treatments. The full hollowing must require specific conditions, hence the timing with the lunar cycle. I considered this. If you're right, we have a narrow window to rescue Miss Hargrove before she's subjected to the complete procedure. Precisely, and I believe I know where to find the evidence we need. Holmes consulted his pocket watch. The London train departs in 40 minutes. We must make haste to the station. London. But Eliza is temporarily safe, Watson. They cannot complete the ritual before the full moon, and our direct intervention now would likely fail. We need allies and information. His expression softened slightly at my evident distress. I understand your concern, but strategic withdrawal is our only viable option. As we made our way to the village station, Holmes outlined his thinking. 3 separate threads require our attention. First, we must understand the Blackwood family's peculiar history more thoroughly, particularly this compact Lady Blackwood mentioned. Second, we require official support for any direct action against a family of their standing. And third, we need to uncover the scientific principles behind this supposed hollowing, if we are to counteract its effects on Miss Hargrove. The train journey passed in tense silence, Holmes lost in contemplation, while I wrestled with the disturbing images of what we had witnessed. The vacant eyes of Lady Blackwood seemed to follow me even when I closed my own. Upon reaching London, Holmes surprised me by directing our cab not to Baker Street, but to Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade received us with his characteristic mixture of respect and wariness. "Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe the honor? Not often you come seeking me out. Usually it's the other way round." "We require your assistance, Lestrade, in a matter of the utmost delicacy and urgency," Holmes replied, his tone uncharacteristically grave. "It concerns the disappearance of Miss Eliza Hargrove." Lestrade's eyebrows rose. "The runaway bride? We've closed that case. Clear matter of cold feet, according to my men." I fear the reality is far darker. Holmes leaned forward. We have located Miss Hargrove. She is being held against her will at Blackwood Manor, subjected to some form of experimental procedure by Lord Blackwood and his mother. Lestrade's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. That's a serious accusation against a peer of the realm, Mr. Holmes. I can't authorize action against the Blackwood estate without substantial evidence. I anticipated as much. Holmes reached into his coat, extracting a folded paper. This is why I require a warrant to examine certain medical records at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, specifically those relating to the deaths of previous Blackwood wives and the treatment of the current Lady Blackwood following her nervous collapse. Lestrade frowned, clearly reluctant. On what grounds, Holmes? On the grounds that I believe those records will provide evidence of a systematic pattern of medical experimentation spanning 3 generations. Holmes met Lestrade's gaze steadily. And on the grounds that if we do not act within 3 days, Miss Eliza Hargrove will become the latest victim of what the Blackwoods refer to as the hollowing. Chapter 8. The Science of Extraction. Through Holmes' persistence and Lestrade's reluctant cooperation, we gained access to the medical archives at St. Bartholomew's by that evening. The hospital's records room was a dimly lit chamber of towering shelves and filing cabinets where the histories of countless patients lay entombed in manila folders and leather-bound ledgers. We need records from 3 specific periods, Holmes instructed as we began our search. First, any documentation regarding the death of Victoria Blackwood in 1835. Second, treatment records for Amelia Blackwood, the current Lord Blackwood's first stepmother, circa 1855. And finally, medical notes concerning Lady Blackwood's nervous condition following the birth of Reginald Blackwood in 1858. For 2 hours we searched methodically, the dust of neglected files irritating our lungs as the hospital around us gradually quieted. For the night, Lestrade had departed after securing our access, clearly unconvinced by Holmes's theories, but sufficiently intrigued to grant us this much latitude. Holmes, look at this. I held up a faded file bearing the name Blackwood v. Inside was a detailed post-mortem examination, conducted at the insistence of a coroner who had found the circumstances of her death suspicious, despite the official verdict of suicide. Holmes scanned the document eagerly, his finger tracing the cramped handwriting of the examining physician. Most illuminating, Watson. The report notes an unusual condition of the orbital cavities, specifically evidence of some surgical procedure having been performed around the eye sockets before death. Surgical procedure? There's no mention of that in the official death certificate, precisely why it was buried in these archives. Holmes continued reading. The physician notes puncture marks at the inner juncture of the ocular cavity and nasal passage, consistent with the insertion of a fine instrument. He further observes that the retinal tissue shows signs of unusual degradation, as though subjected to some chemical agent. A chill ran through me. Are you suggesting the Blackwoods were performing some kind of experimental surgery on their wives' eyes? It appears so, but to what purpose? Holmes set aside the file and resumed his search with renewed vigor. We must find the records of Amelia Blackwood. Another hour of searching yielded results. Amelia Blackwood had been admitted to St. Bartholomew's in 1856, suffering from what the admitting physician described as acute melancholia with physical debilitation. The treatment notes, however, contained observations far more disturbing. Listen to this, Watson. Patient exhibits unusual ocular symptoms, pupillary response severely diminished, scleral tissue showing signs of atrophy. Patient reports sensation of emptiness behind the eyes and claims repeatedly that something has been taken. Physical examination reveals evidence of puncture wounds similar to those used in the experimental procedure documented by Dr. Heinrich Reichenbach in his controversial work on cerebrospinal extraction. Reichenbach? I queried, the name unfamiliar to me. "A German physician whose theories were rejected by the medical establishment," Holmes replied, already moving to another section of the archives. His work bordered on the mystical. He believed that human consciousness resided in a specialized fluid that could, theoretically, be extracted and preserved. That's preposterous. To modern medical science, certainly, but to a family with a history of obsession with ancestral preservation? Holmes raised an eyebrow. If the Blackwoods discovered Reichenbach's work, they might have attempted to implement his theories, with horrific consequences for their wives. Our final discovery was perhaps the most illuminating: a private case file concerning the current Lady Blackwood, compiled by a physician who had treated her at Blackwood Manor rather than at the hospital. The notes had been submitted to the medical archives as a case study in what the doctor termed ocular deterioration following experimental treatment. This physician was clearly troubled by what he witnessed, Holmes observed as he read. He documents a progressive hollowing of Lady Blackwood's eye sockets over a period of months following her son's birth. He notes that Lord Blackwood insisted the condition was hereditary, but the doctor suspected some form of ongoing procedure was responsible. Most significantly, the file contained detailed sketches of specialized equipment observed in Lord Blackwood's private laboratory, equipment that matched what we had seen in the underground chamber at Blackwood Manor. "The final piece of the puzzle," Holmes murmured, carefully copying the diagrams into his notebook. "The Blackwoods have been performing some variation of Reichenbach's extraction procedure for generations, though whether they truly believe they are preserving ancestral consciousness or simply engaging in ritualized torture is unclear. But what of the pit we observed, and Lady Blackwood's reference to hunger?" Holmes' expression was grave. "I have a theory, Watson, though it stretches the boundaries of scientific plausibility. If one were to accept Reichenbach's premise that consciousness can be extracted and preserved, might not such an accumulation of extracted essences develop a composite awareness, a hunger, if you will, for further sustenance?" I stared at him, aghast. "You suggest this pit contains the combined consciousness of generations of Blackwood victims? Holmes, that borders on the supernatural." "I suggest nothing definitive," he replied calmly. "Merely a hypothesis that aligns with our observations. What matters now is that we understand the physical process of the hollowing, a surgical procedure, combined with chemical treatments, performed in stages, culminating in a final extraction timed to coincide with the full moon. Armed with this knowledge, we can finally confront the Blackwoods with evidence too substantial for even Lestrade to ignore." As we gathered our documented evidence, Holmes suddenly tensed, his head tilting toward the archive's entrance. "We are not alone, Watson," he whispered, extinguishing the lamp at our table. In the darkness, I heard what had alerted Holmes, the soft tread of footsteps approaching through the rows of shelving. A beam of light swept across the room from a bullseye lantern illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. "Who goes there?" I called out, reaching for my revolver. The beam swung toward us, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I found myself looking at the impassive face of Gideon, the Blackwood servant, his massive silhouette blocking the only exit. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," came another voice from behind the hulking figure. Lord Blackwood stepped into view, his aristocratic features set in an expression of cold determination. "I believe you have been prying into matters that do not concern you. Most unwise." Holmes rose slowly, positioning himself between me and our visitors. "On the contrary, Lord Blackwood, the systematic torture and murder of innocent women concerns any man of conscience. Your family's tradition ends now." "You misunderstand the nature of our work, Mr. Holmes." Blackwood's voice carried an unsettling note of genuine conviction. "We preserve what would otherwise be lost. The hollowing is not destruction. It is transcendence. And I'm afraid neither of you will be leaving this room with the knowledge you have acquired." Gideon took a menacing step forward, and I raised my revolver. The standoff had begun, with Eliza Hargrove's fate and perhaps our own, hanging in the balance. Chapter 9. A narrow escape. "Lower your weapon, Dr. Watson," Lord Blackwood commanded, his aristocratic voice carrying the unquestioned authority of generations of privilege. "This need not end in violence." My revolver remained steady, aimed at the center of Gideon's broad chest. "I think it rather too late for peaceful resolutions, Lord Blackwood. We've seen your underground chamber. We know what you've done to Eliza Hargrove, and to generations of innocent women before her." Blackwood's lips curved in what might have been a smile on any other face, but on his seemed merely a mechanical adjustment of features. "What we've done is preserve our lineage through methods you cannot possibly comprehend. The women you so gallantly champion have not been destroyed. They have been elevated. Their essence continues within the vessel." "The pit," Holmes said quietly. "You believe it contains their consciousness." "Not believe, Mr. Holmes. No." Blackwood took another step forward. "For 300 years, my family has maintained the compact. In exchange for our service, we have enjoyed wealth, influence, and knowledge far beyond ordinary men. What appears barbaric to your limited understanding is, in fact, the most profound form of transcendence." Throughout this exchange, I noticed Holmes gradually shifting his position, maneuvering himself toward a table laden with antiquated medical equipment. His intentions became clear when he suddenly seized a large glass bottle and hurled it directly at the overhead gas lamp. The resulting explosion was not large, but in the confined space of the archives, its effect was dramatic. The lamp shattered, raining burning oil onto the dry papers below. Flames leapt up instantly, triggering the hospital's fire alarm. "Run, Watson!" Holmes shouted, overturning a bookcase to block our pursuers. Smoke billowed through the room as medical records ignited, creating a chaotic screen behind which we made our escape through a side entrance Holmes had earlier identified. The hospital erupted into activity, staff rushing to contain the fire while patients were evacuated. In the confusion, we slipped away unnoticed, Holmes leading us through a labyrinth of corridors and finally out through the kitchens into the cool night air. "A regrettable but necessary destruction," Holmes commented as we hurried away from the building, the sounds of fire wagons approaching in the distance. I had already documented the essential evidence. But at what cost, Holmes? Those records were copies of the originals, which remain safely preserved in the Royal College of Physicians' Archive. "The destruction works to our advantage, Watson. Lord Blackwood will believe we lost the evidence in the fire. We made our way back to Baker Street through a circuitous route, taking care to ensure we weren't followed. Only when we were safely ensconced in our rooms, with Mrs. Hudson instructed to admit no visitors under any circumstances, did Holmes finally relax his vigilance. "We have less than 48 hours before the full moon," he said, spreading his notes across the table. "Lord Blackwood will undoubtedly accelerate his plans now that he knows we have uncovered his secret." "What exactly is this compact he mentioned?" I asked, still struggling to make sense of the night's revelations. Holmes lit his pipe, settling into his armchair. "From what we have gathered, it appears the first Baron Blackwood, a man of limited prospects but boundless ambition, made some form of agreement he understood to be with supernatural forces. Whether this was genuine or merely the delusion of a disturbed mind is immaterial. What matters is that subsequent generations have maintained this belief, performing their grotesque ritual of extraction with each new bride. But to what end? What do they believe they're accomplishing? They believe they are feeding some entity, the vessel, as Blackwood called it, with the extracted consciousness of their wives. In return, they receive continued prosperity. The scientific apparatus we observed suggests they have developed a pseudo-scientific methodology to justify what is, at its core, ritual sacrifice. I shuddered at the thought. And Eliza Hargrove discovered this before her wedding. Precisely. In the Blackwood family papers, she likely found references to previous brides and their fates. Her note about hollow eyes suggests she may have even seen images of the victims after their hollowing. Holmes paced the room, his energy undiminished despite the late hour. The question now is how to rescue her and bring the Blackwoods to justice. Lestrade will require more convincing evidence than our testimony alone. Lord Blackwood's influence runs deep. Holmes stopped pacing suddenly. There is one person whose testimony might prove decisive, however, someone who has witnessed the Blackwood rituals firsthand. Who? Lady Hargrove. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Consider, Watson. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances 6 months ago. What if Lord Hargrove discovered the fate planned for his daughter and threatened to expose the Blackwoods? His riding accident may have been no accident at all. But Lady Hargrove showed no knowledge of the ritual when she consulted us. Perhaps, not consciously. But she may have observed or overheard more than she realizes. Holmes reached for his coat. We must speak with her immediately. If my theory is correct, she may be in danger herself. A loose end the Blackwoods cannot afford with their secret exposed. We arrived at the Hargrove residence shortly after midnight to find the house dark, save for a single light in the downstairs study. The butler who answered our urgent knock appeared deeply troubled. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm afraid Lady Hargrove is not at home. At this hour? Where has she gone? Holmes demanded. She received a message earlier this evening, a breakthrough, regarding Miss Eliza's whereabouts. She departed immediately for Blackwood Manor. The elderly servant wrung his hands. I expressed concern about the lateness of the hour, but she insisted the matter couldn't wait until morning. Holmes and I exchanged alarmed glances. When precisely did she leave? Holmes asked. Nearly 3 hours ago, sir. A carriage was sent. For her. One bearing the Blackwood crest. Holmes's face hardened. They've lured her into their trap. With both Eliza and her stepmother in their power, the Blackwoods can proceed with their ritual and eliminate the 2 people who might expose them. Then we must return to Sussex immediately, I said, already moving toward the door. Yes, but not alone. Holmes turned to the butler. Send messages to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard and to my brother Mycroft at Whitehall. Tell them Sherlock Holmes requires immediate assistance at Blackwood Manor on a matter of life and death. Then find us the fastest transportation to Sussex, whatever the cost. As we stepped out into the fog-shrouded London night, I felt the weight of time pressing down upon us. Somewhere in the darkness of Blackwood Manor, Eliza Hargrove and her stepmother faced a horror beyond imagination, and the full moon, herald of the final hollowing, drew inexorably closer. Chapter 10. Return to Blackwood Manor dawn broke with anemic light as our train rattled through the Sussex countryside. Holmes had chartered a special locomotive, an extravagance I'd rarely seen him indulge in, speaking volumes about the urgency he felt. Beside him sat Inspector Lestrade, who had arrived at the station just as we were boarding, summoned by the butler's urgent message. I still find this whole business difficult to credit, Holmes, Lestrade remarked, reviewing the notes and diagrams Holmes had salvaged from the hospital archives. Extracting consciousness through the eye sockets? It sounds like something from a penny dreadful. Nevertheless, Inspector, 2 women's lives hang in the balance, Holmes replied tersely. Whether the Blackwoods' beliefs have any basis in reality is immaterial. They have clearly been abducting and experimenting on their brides for generations, as the medical evidence confirms. And you're certain your brother's men will meet us there? Holmes nodded. Mycroft's telegram was explicit. A detachment from the Home Office will rendezvous with us at Thornfield Village. This matter extends beyond mere criminal activity. There are implications for national security in a peer of the realm conducting such experiments. The remainder of our journey passed in tense silence. I found myself unable to banish the image of Lady Blackwood's hollow eyes from my mind, nor the memory of Eliza Hargrove's terrified face as she was carried toward that ghastly pit. At Thornfield Station, we were met by a grim-faced gentleman who introduced himself only as Mr. Harrington, from the Home Office. Accompanying him were 4 sturdy men who, despite their civilian attire, moved with the disciplined precision of military personnel. "Your brother sends his regards, Mr. Holmes," Harrington said quietly. "We have secured the necessary warrants and are prepared to raid Blackwood Manor immediately. Our intelligence suggests unusual activity at the estate, several carriages arriving late last night, and the staff appears to be preparing for some manner of ceremony." "The final hollowing," Holmes murmured, "accelerated due to our interference. We must move quickly." Our approach to Blackwood Manor differed markedly from our previous visit. This time we advanced through the wooded estate grounds, avoiding the main drive. Harrington's men moved with silent efficiency, securing the perimeter as Holmes led us toward a service entrance he had identified during our escape. "The chapel will be heavily guarded," Holmes whispered as we gathered in the shadow of a gardener's outbuilding. "But there is another entrance to the underground complex, a ventilation shaft that emerges near the old stables. I observed it during our flight but lacked time to investigate." This alternative entrance proved to be a narrow tunnel, originally designed to provide air to the underground chambers, but long since expanded to allow passage of a man. One by one, we descended into the dank darkness, emerging into a storage room adjacent to the laboratory we had discovered previously. From somewhere deeper in the complex came the monotonous sound of chanting, a low, rhythmic intonation that seemed to vibrate the very stone around us. "They've already begun," Holmes whispered, his face grim in the beam of Harrington's dark lantern. "The ceremony must be timed precisely to the zenith of the full moon." "Which is when, exactly?" Lestrade asked. 17 minutes from now," Holmes replied, consulting his pocket watch. "We must proceed with utmost caution. The Blackwoods will have their full complement of servants guarding the approach." Guided by Holmes's recollection of the layout, we made our way through the labyrinthine passages, the chanting growing steadily louder. Twice we were forced to retreat into shadowed alcoves as robed figures hurried past, their faces concealed by hoods emblazoned with arcane symbols. Finally, we reached the antechamber to the central pit room. Through a partly open door, I could see an astonishing and horrifying tableau. The circular chamber was now illuminated by dozens of black candles, their flickering light casting grotesque shadows across the stone walls. Around the pit stood 7 robed figures, Lord Blackwood prominent among them, his aristocratic features visible beneath his hood. Lady Blackwood occupied one of the stone thrones encircling the pit, her hollow-eyed gaze fixed on the pit's center, where a complex apparatus had been erected, a nightmarish fusion of medical equipment and ritualistic elements. Strapped to a reclined chair within this apparatus was Eliza Hargrove, her face deadly pale, her eyes already showing the beginning stages of the hollowing process. Her expression was one of frozen terror, though whether she was conscious or merely paralyzed by drugs I could not determine. Nearby, secured to a second chair but not yet connected to the apparatus, was Lady Hargrove, struggling weakly against her restraints. "Please," she begged, her voice barely audible above the chanting. "Whatever quarrel you have with me, release my stepdaughter. She knows nothing." "On the contrary," Lord Blackwood interrupted, his voice carrying that same unsettling note of genuine conviction we had heard in the hospital archives. "She knows a great deal, enough to flee rather than fulfill her duty as a Blackwood bride. Just as your husband learned too much before his unfortunate accident." "You killed George?" Lady Hargrove's voice broke with shock and grief. "He discovered our family's secret and threatened exposure. The compact cannot be broken. The consequences would be unimaginable." Blackwood nodded to Gideon, who stepped forward with a vial of cloudy liquid. "You will join your stepdaughter in transcendence. The vessel hungers for new essence, and with the extraction of 2 consciousnesses simultaneously, we may finally achieve what generations of Blackwoods have worked toward: complete communion with the source." "Now, Holmes?" Lestrade whispered, his hand on his service revolver. Holmes shook his head minutely. "Not yet. We must disable the extraction apparatus before confronting them. If that device activates—" He never finished his sentence. From within the chamber came a sudden cry as Lady Hargrove spotted us through the partially open door. "Help! Please, someone help us!" Lord Blackwood's head snapped toward our position, his eyes widening in recognition and fury. "Intruders! Seal! The chamber!" In an instant, our element of surprise was lost. Harrington's men surged forward on Lestrade's command, while Holmes and I focused on reaching the extraction apparatus. The robed figures scattered in confusion, some fleeing while others moved to protect their master. "Stop them!" Lord Blackwood shouted as Holmes leapt toward the central platform where Eliza was secured. "The alignment cannot be broken." Above, the pit, a shaft of moonlight suddenly pierced through a cunningly designed aperture in the ceiling, illuminating the ghastly scene with cold, silver light. The moment of the final hollowing had arrived, and chaos erupted as we fought to prevent the completion of a ritual 3 centuries in the making. Chapter 11. The final hollowing chaos erupted in the ritual chamber, as Lestrade's men clashed with the robed servants of the Blackwood household. The air filled with shouts and the sound of struggle, but I remained focused on Holmes, who had reached Eliza's side and was working feverishly to disconnect her from the hideous apparatus. "Watson," he called sharply. "The control mechanism, there." He pointed to an elaborate console of brass valves and crystal tubes where a viscous fluid pulsed with unnatural luminescence. I lunged toward it, only to find my path blocked by Gideon, his massive frame somehow even more imposing in the ceremonial robes. His face remained impassive as he swung a heavy metal rod toward my head. I ducked beneath the blow and drove my shoulder into his midsection, the impact like striking a stone wall. He barely staggered, seizing me by the throat with one powerful hand. "The ceremony cannot be stopped," he intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. "The vessel must be fed." My vision began to darken as his grip tightened. Through dimming sight, I saw Holmes abandon his efforts with Eliza to come to my aid, striking Gideon's arm with surgical precision at a nerve point. The giant's grip loosened just enough for me to break free, gasping for air. Meanwhile, Lord Blackwood had retreated to his mother's side, the two of them still near the pit's edge, their expressions showing not fear but outrage at the interruption of their sacred ritual. "You cannot comprehend what you interfere with," Lord Blackwood shouted over the commotion. 3 centuries of sacrifice. The compact must be honored." As if in response to his words, a strange phenomenon began within the pit. The phosphorescent glow intensified, swirling upward like luminous smoke. The chanting, which had faltered with our intrusion, now resumed with renewed fervor from Lady Blackwood, her hollow eyes fixed on the manifestation rising from the depths. "Holmes!" I called in alarm. "Something's happening." My friend had returned to Eliza's side and was disconnecting tubes from the apparatus with methodical precision. "Whatever you observe, Watson, maintain your scientific skepticism. This is a carefully orchestrated illusion designed to terrify and convince, nothing more." Yet even Holmes paused momentarily as the luminous vapor coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, its features constantly shifting, as though comprised of many faces merging and separating in endless permutation. From this apparition came a sound that could not properly be called a voice, more a resonance that vibrated in the bones rather than the ears. "The compact stands. The payment is due. The hollowing must be completed." Several of Lestrade's men faltered at this manifestation, their expressions betraying superstitious terror. Even Harrington, who had struck me as unflappable, took an involuntary step backward. Only Holmes appeared unmoved, his attention returning immediately to Eliza. "Suggestion and hypnosis, combined with some chemical agent in the air," he announced loudly. "A masterful deception, Lord Blackwood, but merely that. A deception, With a final twist, he disconnected the primary tube connecting Eliza to the apparatus. Immediately, a high-pitched whine emanated from the machinery, and the luminous shape above the pit contorted violently. "No!" Lord Blackwood screamed, genuine panic replacing his aristocratic composure. "The circuit cannot be broken during extraction. The consequences—" He never finished his warning. The apparatus began to shake, glass tubes shattering as the mysterious fluid within them boiled and evaporated. The luminous shape above the pit writhed and expanded, filling the chamber with blinding light, and an unearthly howl that drove several men to their knees, hands clasped over their ears. Through the chaos, I saw Holmes shielding Eliza with his own body as he worked to free her from the remaining restraints. Lady Hargrove remained secured to her chair, just beyond his reach. I fought my way toward her through the disoriented crowd, narrowly avoiding Gideon, who moved with single-minded purpose toward Holmes and Eliza. "The girl belongs to the vessel." Lady Blackwood's voice cut through the cacophony, her hollow eyes now blazing with an internal light that matched the pit's glow. "The hollowing will be completed." She raised her hands in a complex gesture, and to my horror, Eliza's body suddenly stiffened, her back arching unnaturally despite being freed from the apparatus. Her eyes flew open, revealing pupils dilated to near blackness, and a thin stream of luminous vapor began to emerge from them, drawn toward the churning mass above the pit. "Holmes!" I shouted in desperation. "It's still extracting from her." My friend's analytical mind worked even in this extremity. His eyes darted from Eliza to the pit to Lady Blackwood, making connections I could only guess at. Then, with sudden decisiveness, he seized a shattered glass tube from the apparatus and drove it into the center of an intricate diagram inscribed on the floor beneath the extraction chair. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The connection between Eliza and the luminous entity severed with an audible snap. Lady Blackwood screamed, a sound of both rage and agony, as the glowing mass above the pit contracted violently, then expanded in a shockwave that knocked most of us from our feet. When I regained my senses moments later, the chamber had fallen eerily silent. The pit's glow had diminished to a faint phosphorescence, and the vaporous entity had vanished. Lord Blackwood lay sprawled at the pit's edge, unconscious but breathing. Of Lady Blackwood, there was no sign. "Holmes?" I called, struggling to my feet. "Here, Watson." His voice came from beside Eliza's chair, where he was checking her vital signs. "She lives, though her condition is precarious. We must get her to proper medical attention immediately." While Lestrade and Harrington's men secured the remaining members of the Blackwood household, I helped Holmes free Lady Hargrove. Together, we carried the two women from that accursed chamber, leaving the mysteries of the pit behind us, at least temporarily. Outside, the night air felt wondrously pure after the miasma of the underground chambers. As we emerged into the moonlight, Eliza stirred in Holmes's arms, her eyes fluttering open. Though deeply sunken, they still held awareness and humanity. The hollowing had been interrupted before completion. "The hollow eyes," she whispered weakly. "I saw them. In my dreams. They wanted to make me like them." "Rest now," Holmes told her gently. "You're safe. The Blackwoods will never harm another bride." As medical assistants arrived and took charge of the women, Holmes drew me aside, his expression troubled despite our apparent victory. "A remarkable case, Watson, that challenges the very boundaries between science and superstition. Surely you don't give credence to that manifestation we witnessed?" I asked incredulously. Holmes gazed back toward the manor, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I maintain that all we observed has a rational explanation, though one that may extend beyond our current scientific understanding. The Blackwoods discovered something in that ancient pit, Watson. Something that may have once been human, but through their centuries of extraction became something else entirely. And Lady Blackwood? She simply vanished. Did she?" Holmes's expression was enigmatic. Or did she finally complete the transformation that began decades ago, full incorporation into the entity she served? These are questions that may never be fully answered, my friend. As we walked toward the waiting carriages, I could not shake the sensation that some mysteries are perhaps better left unsolved, and that in the case of the hollow-eyed bride, we had only glimpsed the surface of a darkness that ran far deeper than even Sherlock Holmes dared to explore. Chapter 12. The Explanation. A fortnight had passed since the events at Blackwood Manor. The autumn chill had deepened into winter's first embrace, and a light snow fell outside our windows at Baker Street, as Holmes and I entertained visitors connected to what the press had discreetly termed a disturbance at the estate of a prominent peer. Lady Hargrove sat across from us, her mourning attire exchanged for more subdued colors that nevertheless suggested a gradual emergence from grief. Beside her, Eliza Hargrove looked remarkably recovered, though a certain shadowed quality remained in her eyes. Not the unnatural hollowness we had witnessed in the Blackwood women, but the lingering memory of horrors barely escaped. The doctors assure me the physical effects will continue to diminish, Eliza was saying, though they confess they've never encountered anything quite like what was done to me. Few medical men would have, Holmes replied, his manner gentle but matter-of-fact. The procedure you were subjected to represents a perversion of both science and ancient mysticism. Knowledge cobbled together over generations by a family consumed by their covenant, with forces they believed transcended ordinary human understanding. But what exactly were they doing, Mr. Holmes? Lady Hargrove asked. Inspector Lestrade has been maddeningly vague, citing ongoing investigations and matters of national security. Holmes exchanged a glance with me before responding. The official records will likely remain sealed for decades, if not permanently. However, you both deserve as complete an explanation as can be provided. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. The Blackwoods believed they had discovered a method to extract and preserve human consciousness, specifically the consciousness of their brides. This extraction was performed through a surgical procedure involving the ocular cavity and certain chemicals that temporarily separated what they termed vital essence from the physical body. But why? Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would they do such a monstrous thing? According to the family documents we examined, the first Baron Blackwood discovered something beneath the manor during renovations in the early 1700s, something that had lain dormant in that pit since pagan times. Whether it was some unknown life form or merely a chemical phenomenon that stimulated hallucinations, he became convinced it was an entity capable of bestowing power and longevity in exchange for sustenance. Lady Hargrove shuddered visibly. Human sacrifice. Of a sort, Holmes agreed. Though the Blackwoods convinced themselves their method was more humane, they took only the consciousness, leaving the physical body intact, if tragically diminished. The bride would continue to exist as a hollow shell, while her essence joined what they called the vessel, that accumulation of extracted consciousnesses we glimpsed in the pit chamber. Then those apparitions, those faces I saw in my dreams, Eliza's voice faltered, were likely the result of chemicals administered to you during your captivity, Holmes said firmly. Designed to make you receptive to the extraction process. I noted how Holmes carefully steered the explanation toward scientific rationality, though I knew he himself harbored uncertainties about what we had witnessed in those final moments beneath Blackwood Manor. And Lord Blackwood? Lady Hargrove inquired. What will become of him? He remains in custody, though not in any ordinary prison, Holmes replied. His mental state has deteriorated significantly since the ritual's interruption. He speaks constantly of the compact being broken and the consequences that will follow. The family's influence has ensured he will be treated as a man suffering from delusions rather than as a criminal, despite the evidence of multiple murders, spanning generations. And Lady Blackwood? I prompted, knowing this was the detail that continued to perplex even Holmes. Chapter 12. The Explanation. A fortnight had passed since the events at Blackwood Manor. The autumn chill had deepened into winter's first embrace, and a light snow fell outside our windows at Baker Street, as Holmes and I entertained visitors connected to what the press had discreetly termed a disturbance at the estate of a prominent peer. Lady Hargrove sat across from us, her mourning attire exchanged for more subdued colors that nevertheless suggested a gradual emergence from grief. Beside her, Eliza Hargrove looked remarkably recovered, though a certain shadowed quality remained in her eyes. Not the unnatural hollowness we had witnessed in the Blackwood women, but the lingering memory of horrors barely escaped. The doctors assure me the physical effects will continue to diminish, Eliza was saying, though they confess they've never encountered anything quite like what was done to me. Few medical men would have, Holmes replied, his manner gentle but matter-of-fact. The procedure you were subjected to represents a perversion of both science and ancient mysticism. Knowledge cobbled together over generations by a family consumed by their covenant, with forces they believed transcended ordinary human understanding. But what exactly were they doing, Mr. Holmes? Lady Hargrove asked. Inspector Lestrade has been maddeningly vague, citing ongoing investigations and matters of national security. Holmes exchanged a glance with me before responding. The official records will likely remain sealed for decades, if not permanently. However, you both deserve as complete an explanation as can be provided. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. The Blackwoods believed they had discovered a method to extract and preserve human consciousness, specifically the consciousness of their brides. This extraction was performed through a surgical procedure involving the ocular cavity and certain chemicals that temporarily separated what they termed vital essence from the physical body. But why? Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would they do such a monstrous thing? According to the family documents we examined, the first Baron Blackwood discovered something beneath the manor during renovations in the early 1700s, something that had lain dormant in that pit since pagan times. Whether it was some unknown life form or merely a chemical phenomenon that stimulated hallucinations, he became convinced it was an entity capable of bestowing power and longevity in exchange for sustenance. Lady Hargrove shuddered visibly. Human sacrifice. Of a sort, Holmes agreed. Though the Blackwoods convinced themselves their method was more humane, they took only the consciousness, leaving the physical body intact, if tragically diminished. The bride would continue to exist as a hollow shell, while her essence joined what they called the vessel, that accumulation of extracted consciousnesses we glimpsed in the pit chamber. Then those apparitions, those faces I saw in my dreams, Eliza's voice faltered, were likely the result of chemicals administered to you during your captivity, Holmes said firmly, designed to make you receptive to the extraction process. I noted how Holmes carefully steered the explanation toward scientific rationality, though I knew he himself harbored uncertainties about what we had witnessed in those final moments beneath Blackwood Manor. And Lord Blackwood? Lady Hargrove inquired. What will become of him? He remains in custody, though not in any ordinary prison, Holmes replied. His mental state has deteriorated significantly since the ritual's interruption. He speaks constantly of the compact being broken and the consequences that will follow. The family's influence has ensured he will be treated as a man suffering from delusions rather than as a criminal, despite the evidence of multiple murders, spanning generations. And Lady Blackwood? I prompted, knowing this was the detail that continued to perplex even Holmes.